Hey everyone, welcome. This is another installment of our herbal chats, herbal discussions, and it's a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I really love talking about this. I mean, to be honest, every herb chat I love, but this one is about hormone balance and herbal support. And a quick caveat slash disclaimer, it will be focusing mainly on bodies that menstruate. That being said, what I would like to say before we get into this specific aspect of the topic is that I think, myself included, like there is a big belief that hormones are mainly related to sex, and, like our reproduction and stuff like that. And that's actually not the case. Hormones are straight up the messengers of our body. And so basically, most physiological processes rely on hormones. So there are other aspects of hormones that we will talk about through some of these videos. Today, it is very much focused on menstruating bodies, and particularly progesterone and estrogen. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say here. If this is the first video that you're watching, my name is Natasha, but you can also call me Nosh. That's one of my nicknames that I go by. And I am a certified clinical herbalist. I work with people one-to-one. I offer corporate workshops and community workshops. And yeah, I'm just a nature lover. I love to play and I love herbs. So that's a little bit of an introduction for me. Um, so let's see. The first thing we're going to talk about here is common hormonal imbalances. So, as I mentioned before, hormones are chemical messengers, so they're in charge of communication in the body. When one is too loud or too quiet, things can get a little bit off balance. So, just think about hormones or think about the body as like a room, and the hormones are people having conversations in the room. If one group is having conversation with a loudspeaker, then that's obviously going to cause a lot of disruption in that room. And likewise, if there are some groups that are whispering, that's going to cause imbalances in the room as well. So some of the patterns that I see in with my clients and also in the wider herbalism community, so PMS and PMDD. Some of y'all may have experienced this. Some of the manifestations of these imbalances are mood swings, breast tenderness, irritability before your period of varying different degrees. Like some can carry over into rage, some can be mild irritability. And this is usually tied to estrogen being too high compared to progesterone. And I will get into some of the reasons of that imbalance between estrogen and progesterone in a minute. The one thing I do want to say, and I'm going to point you in the direction from someone who has much better research and resources out there. But I was recently listening to a video by Carol Peterson, who her website is the Wellness by Design Project, and she has a lot of really cool experience and research based on progesterone and how progesterone has kind of been the boogeyman. And so a lot of people are actually very fearful of progesterone in a lot of these hormonal transitions, particularly for menstruating bodies. But actually that using real bioidentical progesterone can do a lot more good for our bodies. Anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent. One of the videos I was watching from her is she was talking about, some of you may be aware, if you ever had sex ed or if you've done any kind of like menstrual cycle course or research, or even just done a little bit of Googling, there's that very common graph that shows the different fluctuations of the different hormones. So there's progesterone, there's estrogen, there's also FSH, so follicle stimulating hormone, and a few others in there. And what she shared in the video is that that is actually a very large form of misinformation because the scales, so there's a few different reasons. One of the reasons is that the scales of the different hormones, so how much there is in your body, are very, very different. So it's actually really hard to chart them on the same graph because the scales are completely different. And also it's really about their relativity to each other. So what these scales or what these graphs sometimes do is they make the viewer think that it's on the same scale and that this is actually just how they fluctuate. But really, how the hormones fluctuate is in relation to each other. So it's not as easy as just to say, like, oh, you have too much estrogen. It's okay, do you have too much estrogen in relationship to the progesterone? And why is that? Is that because you are producing too much estrogen? Is it because your body isn't getting rid of estrogen well enough? Is it because your body is not producing enough progesterone? So some of these graphs can be simplistic. Anyway, point you to that. Carol Peterson, the Wellness by Design project, she has a lot of really great information on that. And this was just like a little summary. Anyway, circling us all the way back to PMS and PMDD. So part of the reason why there's this imbalance, as we were talking about, between estrogen being too high compared to progesterone, is that your estrogen levels could be too high because you have poor detoxification pathways. So essentially, your body is detoxifying all the time through your urine, through your poop, through your sweat, even through breathing, through your liver. And if these detoxification pathways are sluggish or slow, you could be making normal amounts of estrogen. It's just that you're not able to get rid of it efficiently. It could also be environmental. So as many of you may have heard or seen in a lot of research, we are basically swimming in phytoestrogens. We're getting estrogens from microplastics and stuff. And so we could actually be ingesting and applying more estrogenic type things than we had been previously. Another reason why PMS, the imbalance, could happen is because your progesterone levels are too low when compared to estrogen. So this could be due to stress. And what's really cool, something I found out recently, is that cortisol, which is one of the stress hormones, borrows from progesterone. So it will actually pull from progesterone. So when you're undergoing chronic stress, so you're like churning through that cortisol, when your body isn't able to make enough of it, what it will do is it will actually pull from progesterone. So your body will still be producing progesterone, but it will be pulling it towards making these stress hormones, cortisol, versus sticking with producing progesterone. And then you could also have just generally be producing low amounts of progesterone in the body. Another imbalance that I have seen before in my practice is irregular or missing cycles. So this could manifest as skipping periods or bleeding unpredictably. And this often is a signal of low progesterone or disrupted communication between your brain and your ovaries. I've also seen heavy or painful periods. So this can be characterized by clotting, cramps, long bleeds. And this is often tied again to something called estrogen dominance or too much estrogen in relation to some of the other hormones. And it's also particularly indicated when your liver is not clearing out excess hormones as well. So not always, but oftentimes the heavy and painful periods can be tied to some liver stagnation. And so some support of the liver can be helpful here. You also see things like fatigue, brain fog, and low mood, especially when it feels cyclical. So some people will report some of these things in the lead up or during their period. And this could indicate some cortisol, so some of that stress hormone, and thyroid involvement. So this often indicates a underlying stress. So there could be some chronic stress going on and nutrient depletion. So when I see clients with these kinds of symptoms, I try to look at their diet. I'm not a nutritionist, but I will sometimes look at some macronutrients, micronutrients, to see if that could be supportive to them. And then we also do a deep dive into stress. So where is the stress coming from? How are you managing it, both through herbs, lifestyle, and diet? I also work with some folks who are transitioning, so from the menopausal period to perimenopausal and menopausal. And some of the symptoms that can accompany this are hot flashes, insomnia, dryness, anxiety. And during this time of your life, both estrogen and progesterone are on the decline. And so your body that has been used to these regular cycles throughout its life is having to catch up and is having to adjust. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. It's basically like puberty, a whole bunch of stuff that is going on. And working with folks during this time requires a very tailored approach because people have different combinations of some of these symptoms, and some of them are more intense than others. So there's no one size fits all. Finally, there are what I have seen before are PCOS, so polycystic ovarian syndrome. And this is often characterized by irregular cycles, acne, hair thinning, or growth. And there's a few different pathways that people think this manifests through. And what I've often found with some of the clients that I'm working with is that it's accompanied with insulin resistance and higher androgens. So these are some, all of these are interrelated. There are some similarities and there's also some differences, and they're all due to hormonal imbalances. So now we're going to dig a little bit into why these imbalances happen. So now that we know the patterns that we're looking out for, some of which may sound familiar, some of which may not, some of y'all may have diagnoses, some of y'all may not, we can talk about why this happens. So your body is not failing. It's responding to its environment. And what we need to do, or what I tend to do when I work with people one-on-one, is to try to understand, okay, what are the environmental factors? What is the diet? What is the lifestyle? Where can herbs support this? Where can diet and lifestyle support this? And how can we bring someone back into balance? So we're now going to go through some of the root causes behind some of these hormonal imbalances that we've seen. So one of them is stress and cortisol overload. So we have talked a little bit about this. This is kind of like big in a lot of the health and wellness spaces now. And what's really at the root of this is that your body is prioritizing survival. So when cortisol is high, so when you're stressed and there's a lot of cortisol in your body, as we mentioned before, your body might borrow from progesterone to make more stress hormones. You might feel anxious, you might feel wired but tired. So that very common thing where you feel tired and you want to go to sleep, but once you're in bed, your brain or your body is just restless and you're wired. Or you may feel like your cycle has gone haywire. So this is especially true. So, like acute moments of stress, like let's say you have a deadline at work, or your kid fell and got hurt. Like there are acute moments of stress. And actually, a lot of that is important for our body because our body is adaptable and needs to undergo a little bit of stress in order to remain flexible and plastic. However, when that becomes chronic, so the common thing is people who are just like overworked, who don't get enough sleep, who maybe are not nourishing their body as well as they could be because they're working so much or they're constantly on the go. This is when stress and cortisol becomes a chronic issue and begins to deplete your body's resources. Another potential source of hormonal imbalance is blood sugar swings. So this happens when you skip meals, when you may have high sugar intake, where there may be a caffeine overload, and all of this adds up. So I have mentioned this in past videos before, and I'm just going to take a quick pause here. My approach to working with people one-on-one, or whether it's one-on-one or in workshops, is not to shame or to lecture people on their dietary habits. We all eat based on multiple different factors. There could be heritage, ancestry, there could be, like emotional eating serves a very specific purpose. We eat what we have access to, what we know to eat. And so my role is not to shame you or to lecture you into what you're eating. It's to understand more about where your relationship with food comes from, and to educate, inform, and make gentle suggestions that are achievable. It's very much a collaboration because really, like, our food system is so distanced from what it used to be. So even if you're eating the cleanest, healthiest diet, it's really hard to actually remove yourself from any kind of toxicity or toxins. And really what we want to do is make sure that the body is nourished. rather than talk about depriving you of things or cutting things out. So that's my little disclaimer there. What's really important to understand in this case, though, is that when we are relying on, skipping meals, on high sugary foods, and on a lot of caffeine, all of this does add up. And so that is a very real thing that we talk about, is how can we rework some of these patterns? How can we make sure to introduce nutrients and nutrition into your body so that we're making sure your body has everything it needs to bring itself back into balance? Now, the reason why these things can disrupt your hormone balance is because when your blood sugar is a roller coaster, it throws off hormone balance and can increase inflammation, which drives further issues in your body. So we're also going to talk about liver and gut detoxification pathways. So as we mentioned before, our bodies are constantly detoxifying, and your body needs to detoxify to eliminate, amongst many other things, used up hormones. So if your liver or gut is sluggish, estrogen can build up in the body, which can lead to PMS and or heavy periods and PMDD and some of the other conditions or imbalances that we were talking about earlier. Nutrient depletion is a big one, similar to what we spoke about with the blood sugar cravings. So our bodies burn through minerals and vitamins like B6, magnesium, and iron with stress, poor sleep, or long-term birth control. And that's a whole other topic that's a bit beyond the scope of today. If you are interested, though, I do have a workshop that's available on demand on my website. It's called Beyond the Pill. Without these minerals, hormone production slows. So B6, magnesium, and iron are all needed for the production of hormones. And so when we live chronically stressed lives, we deplete our bodies of those hormones, particularly if we are not providing enough for our bodies. One of the really cool things that I like to share is that that common craving that happens around your period. I'm sure either you have experienced it or if you've heard folks experience of that, of like dark chocolate or chocolate. That's actually a very real signal that your body is depleted of magnesium, because chocolate does contain magnesium. And so around that time of your cycle where you're craving chocolate, what it actually is a craving for magnesium. And so you can get that in many different ways, chocolate included. So that's great. Life transitions, we spoke a little bit about perimenopause, but also here, puberty, postpartum, perimenopause. These are all transitions that throw huge waves into your hormones and the shifts that they are used to, or the cycles that they are used to experiencing. So these are natural shifts, but without support, they can become symptoms instead of transitions. So this is what I like to do when I work with folks who are going through, especially perimenopause, is to kind of like explain and educate about what is happening in the body, and then supporting the individual through these transitions so that they don't become stuck symptoms that continue on. Finally, the environment, we spoke a little bit about this already, but phytoestrogens can enter the body from microplastics and other sources, like even sometimes the stuff that we apply onto our skin and hair. And the only true way to detoxify the body from them is in a sauna. And I've actually done a little bit of research on this. I originally heard it on a podcast from Dr. Mercola, if any of y'all are familiar with his podcast. He has an episode about this. And I did a little bit of my own external research on that. And it's actually super fascinating that saunas can stimulate microplastic detoxification through the sweating process. All right. So now we are going to transition into the part of the workshop / discussion where I talk about herbs. So I'm going to share with you some herbs that can support hormonal balance. And I think this is a particularly a particularly good place to go into that, because we've looked into the underlying causes and the underlying imbalances and what causes those imbalances. So now we can look towards herbs to support bringing our bodies back into balance. So we're going to talk about 3 herbs here. We are going to talk about red raspberry leaf, Vitex, and Dong Quai. So starting here with red raspberry leaf. So as some of y'all may have known, if you've seen my videos before, if not, I'm just going to do a quick little overview. I am trained in the Western herbalism tradition. And in this tradition, as with in many traditions, we have a way of categorizing different bodies and different herbs and even different conditions through something called energetics. So most traditions have their own version of that. In Western herbalism, there's hot, cold, wet, and dry. There's a few other ones that are just beyond the scope of this discussion. So those are the four main ones that we're going to talk about. And every human has a combination of these energetics, and every herb has a combination of these energetics. And the reason why this is important to understand is because if someone has the combination of hot and wet, we don't want to then have them work with an herb that is also hot and wet, because that could exacerbate their underlying constitution. What we'd want to do is maybe work with cooling herbs and drying herbs to balance out some of that heat and damp in their body. So you'll hear me talk about this with the different herbs. And in this case with red raspberry leaf is cooling to neutral. So it can be a little bit more cool and also a bit more neutral. It gently reduces excess heat or inflammation, particularly in the reproductive system and digestive tract. So what I find super fascinating about, or one of the things that I find super fascinating about herbs and herbalism is that not every single herb, but some herbs have specific affinities for specific body systems and or even organs. So red raspberry leaf is a really great example for that, because it may work to reduce heat and inflammation in the entire body, but it specifically is indicated for the reproductive system and the digestive tract. Red raspberry leaf is especially helpful when there is a sense of irritability, heat, or tension around menstruation. So just as raspberry leaf is cooling to neutral, they're also drying to neutral. So it's a cooler and a drier herb. And they can be very astringent. So they're toning the tissues, which is particularly helpful in conditions with excess fluid, like heavy bleeding or loose stools, for example. So red raspberry leaf, in addition to being an ally for menstruating folks, can also be an ally for people who are experiencing a lot of diarrhea. And that's an indication that there's just a lot of looseness, a lot of excess fluid, and red raspberry leaf will cool and soothe the tissues and dry up those tissues. So if someone is already running very dry, so indications of this could be dry skin, dry tissues, or constipation. If you still want to work with red raspberry leaf, it's best to pair this with a more moistening herb like marshmallow root or licorice to kind of balance out some of that and not to make someone too dry. So this herb, so red raspberry leaf, acts as a tonic and mild astringent, especially to the uterine and pelvic tissues. So just as we mentioned that red raspberry leaf has a specific affinity for reproductive and gut systems, they are also within those systems specifically have specific affinities to the uterus and to the pelvis. So this helps to restore tone to tissues that feel lax, heavy, or overextended, often seen in postpartum or in people with heavy dragging periods. So this is a really good ally for folks once they have given birth. So just a quick summary of everything that we've spoken about. So red raspberry leaf is supportive as a uterine-specific tonic. So they strengthen and tones the uterus over time. The last thing I'll say here about red raspberry leaf, which is super powerful, is that they have a lot of nutrients that are delivered specifically to the uterus. So whenever the uterus is under functioning, red raspberry leaf is really supportive here to bring back some of those nutrients to the uterus. So it's nourishing, just as I just mentioned, rich in minerals like iron, calcium, and magnesium, all of which are delivered directly to the uterus. Astringent, so it gently tightens tissues, making it helpful for excessive menstrual flow or diarrhea, and is a mild nervine, so speaks very mildly to the nervous system and can be subtly calming to the nervous system, which can be supportive in some of these PMS, PMDD times where our nervous system is a little bit frayed. So this herb is best for folks with heavy periods, cramps, or postpartum recovery. Anyone feeling depleted, especially after giving birth, long periods, or blood loss. and those with slightly overheated, relaxed, or dry tissue states in the pelvis. So the reason why, kind of bringing it all together, the reason why that red raspberry leaf is supportive is that it tones the uterus and replenishes minerals your hormones need to function. Try this as a daily tea during the second half of your cycle or any time that you are feeling depleted. So red raspberry leaf is a very common tea that you'll see out there. You may have even experience with it yourself. Sometimes it's paired with nettle and oat straw as a very nourishing blend. All right, so transitioning now into Vitex. They've also been called chaste berry. So you may have heard it with either of those names. This one is warming to neutral and drying to neutral. So whereas red raspberry leaf was cooling to neutral, this one is warming and drying. So Vitex gently supports circulation and hormonal signaling without being overly stimulating, and is a good match for those who run cool or have sluggish endocrine activity. So Vitex is really cool. We'll get into this a little bit, but it's really supportive for folks who have low progesterone when compared to estrogen. And I won't get exactly into the mechanics of how it works, but essentially it supports progesterone production kind of indirectly in the body. So when you are having classic cases of estrogen dominance, Vitex can be a very good go-to to maximize some of that progesterone production to try to bring that back into balance. So Vitex has a mildly drying effect and is supportive when there's dampness, stagnation, or excess mucus. So if you're thinking about, like if you're having consistently delayed periods or you just feel that pressure building up and it's taking a while to release, Vitex can be supportive in this case. It can, if someone is too dry or has dry reproductive tissues, when used long term, Vitex can be a bit too drying. So, and to be honest, Vitex, because it works indirectly on the hormonal system, excuse me, Vitex is best used, at least in my experience. I know there's a lot of research out there, but in my experience working with clients, it's something that you cycle on and cycle off of rather than taking it consistently. So as I mentioned before, Vitex is particularly helpful in cases of low progesterone, luteal phase deficiency, or anovulation. So when you're not ovulating. And actually there is a lot of research too about how working with Vitex in a very specific way can be supportive when people are experiencing infertility due to a lack of ovulation. So yeah, Vitex can be a very strong ally in that case as well. So a brief summary here. So Vitex is an endocrine modulator. So what this means is that it will be supportive to the body's own hormone regulation through pituitary signaling. So it indirectly supports progesterone production and can help boost progesterone in relation to estrogen to bring them back a little bit more into balance. It's also a progesterone promoter, so it encourages corpus luteum development, which improves progesterone production. It's a menstrual regulator, so it can support regular cycles, ovulation, and reduce symptoms of PMS. And it also has a liver affinity, so it gently supports detox pathways, which indirectly helps hormonal clearance. So this is a really great one, as I mentioned before, when in classic cases of estrogen dominance, where there may be low progesterone production because it will stimulate that progesterone production, but it will also support the liver's ability to detoxify the body from any excess estrogen that's just chilling and sitting there. So this herb is a very strong ally for people with irregular cycles, premenstrual mood swings, acne, or luteal phase deficiencies. It's also great for individuals experiencing post-birth control recovery, especially if cycles are missing or unpredictable. So once you've had your baby, if your cycles remain missing or remain unpredictable, this could be a really good ally to help bring that back into balance. And those with signs of estrogen dominance or low progesterone, such as sore breasts, PMS, and mid-cycle spotting. So why this helps, Vitex helps when used consistently over time or through cycles to soothe emotional PMS symptoms. So this one is slow and steady. And this is something that I've seen working with my clients where it can take a few months to come into effect. And so what you'll see is I'll introduce my clients to it. It will take a few months to take effect, and then they'll start to experience more balance. And the reason why I shared earlier that I think this one is best to cycle on and off of is partly because of the dryness, but partly as well because what you can see is what you're really trying to do is you're trying to reintroduce your body to its normal functioning. Like everyone's normal is different, but when you are out of balance, you're trying to reintroduce your body to your balanced state. And so what can happen if you're taking Vitex too long is it can almost overcorrect. And you can see the return of some of those symptoms if you're taking Vitex a little bit too long. So once you start to see some of those mild symptoms return, I will wean my client off of it and eventually just cut it out altogether. And it can be a very cool tool that people can learn to work with, cycle on and off, depending on how their hormones are. All right, so getting into the last one, Dong Quai. So Dong Quai is warming and moistening. So this is the first herb that we've spoken about today that's a little bit wet or like in the wet category. It is also a warming herb. So this one comes to us from traditional Chinese medicine and is seen more and more nowadays in in Western herbalism and in other traditions. This herb gently stimulates circulation of qi, which is the life force in traditional Chinese medicine, what makes it ideal for people who run cold, feel sluggish, or have stagnation in the reproductive system. The warmth that comes from this herb is especially beneficial for those with cold hands, feet, cold uteruses, or long, slow periods. This herb provides nourishment and blood building qualities to address dryness. So, especially when folks are experiencing vaginal dryness, dry skin, or dry constipation. It's slightly moistening, but not overly damp. So, it balances nicely for constitutions that are dry and cold. This is ideal. So Dong Quai is ideal for tissue states that are depleted, weak, or congested, particularly when there's poor circulation, which can manifest as scanty menses, so very light bleeding, or post-illness fatigue. It's also useful when we're looking at more emotional side of things. So when the emotions, like the energy around emotions, feel stuck or frozen. So Dong Quai is super supportive as a blood tonic. So it builds, nourishes, and moves blood, again, with a specific affinity for the uterus. It's also a hormone modulator, so will gently support estrogen balance, especially in menopause or amenorrhea. This is a circulatory stimulant, which enhances peripheral and pelvic blood flow. So again, bringing blood and warmth to the pelvis. It's not quite an adaptogen, but it can act kind of like a nervine adaptogen. Again, not a true adaptogen, but this is restorative and calming, especially when exhaustion is present. So if you're one of those people who bleed and have deep exhaustion during bleeding time, Dong Quai could be very supportive for you. They also have an affinity with the liver, so they can help regulate and smooth emotional tension. Particularly when some of that emotional tension before bleeding time is associated with anger. So liver is connected with anger in the body, and so anything that is supportive to the liver can be supportive with anger. So this is best, Dong Quai is best for people with scanty or absent periods, especially with fatigue, anemia, or pale complexion. Those moving through perimenopause or menopause with symptoms like dryness, fatigue, or low libido. Can be useful postpartum after the bleeding has stopped. So when you've given birth, if you are bleeding, you want to wait for that to completely stop before you work with Dong Quai, because as we've talked about, Dong Quai brings circulation, brings nourishing and blood building to the pelvis. So we don't want to exacerbate that when you're already bleeding. It's also supportive for folks whose menstrual cycles are slow to start, painful, or come with that emotional stagnation. So, Dong Quai helps by supporting blood flow, nourishing depleted systems, and balancing estrogen. As we just mentioned, use very cautiously if in cases of heavy bleeding, and best use under guidance of an experienced herbalist. So, a few little quick mentions here. There's two additional herbs that can be supportive. I love to work with ashwagandha with a lot of my clients, particularly the ones who are dealing with some kind of hormonal imbalance, specifically when that is paired with stress and burnout, because ashwagandha specifically is supportive for cortisol balance. And I also like to mention nettle leaf, which is essentially like a multivitamin in plant form. So it's rich in iron, calcium, and magnesium, all of which are vitamins and minerals that your body needs. The one thing I will say about nettle is that it runs very hot and dry. So if someone is hot and dry, it could actually create a lot of tension in the body. So you just want to be careful about who you're working with that. All right. So that kind of brings us to the end. Just to kind of summarize here, if you are experiencing any kind of hormonal imbalance, this is actually very common and it's not your fault. There are clear reasons why it happens. We spoke about stress, nutrient depletion, poor detox, blood sugar swings, general hormone imbalance, whether that's due to taking in phytoestrogens or some kind of deficiency in the production in your body. And herbs can help your body come back into balance, especially when paired with the right support. So if you are experiencing any of these things, even if you don't have a diagnosis, even if you're not sure, it can be very supportive to work with an herbalist. I know a lot of my clients have come to me after going through the whole Western medical system and not finding sufficient support. Now, again, as part of my approach, I'm not here to speak poorly on the Western medical system. It's very supportive in a lot of ways. There's a lot of really good research, a lot of really good doctors out there who really want to help people. And I think that Western medicine and herbalism can work hand in hand. So it's just so happened that a lot of my clients have come to me after experiencing, a lack of support or a lack of help through the Western medical system. But yeah, I work with people who are on all kinds of pharmaceuticals. I work with people who are on all kinds of natural lifestyles and no pharmaceuticals. But really, like the key to hormone imbalance is addressing them early, because the further that your body gets imbalanced, the further issues could occur. So yeah, that is the end of this chat. I will see you guys next time. If you are interested in getting in touch, whether it's because you have specific questions about this talk, or you have a specific topic that you'd like to see a video on, or if you are interested to learn more about working one-on-one with me, you can find out all of that and get in touch through my website. It's brujanaturalofferings.com, and that's bruja with an H. Or you can also shoot me an email at brujanaturalofferings@gmail.com. Again, bruja with an H. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.